welcome to this, our second edition of Berklee Online Live, a bi-weekly interview series in which you, the listeners, get to ask our amazing guests the questions. I'm here to facilitate, or at least to do my best to facilitate and get answers to what you want to hear. On March 8th, we'll be pleased to welcome my amazing friend Tim Quirk from Freeform to answer your questions, followed by my amazing guests such as the legendary Bob Ezrin, Dweezil Zappa, Meryl Garbus, and Ableton CEO Gerhard Bales. With more amazing guests to follow and to be announced. I'm your host, Benji Rogers, and I'm a father, recovering musician, coffee drinker, frequent flyer, founder of PledgeMusic, and current CEO of the Blockchain Music Project. I'm also a board member of the Future Music Coalition, as well as a Berklee alumni, and I currently teach the Berklee Digital Trends and Strategies course online. So there it is. I'm uncomfortable reading it, but there it is. It's my great, great honor to introduce you now to the amazing Ryan Leslie. Ryan and I met at MIT on a panel in front of about probably 100 people, which is always an awkward thing. We got along well, and my first memory, Ryan, before I ask you kind of more about yourself, is you're like, check out this app on my phone, and you showed it to me, right. And my mind just exploded. And that was an early version, if I'm correct, of Superphone, right?
Yes, it was.
Yeah. So Ryan, I don't like to read bios. Tell me about yourself. Tell us all about yourself for those who don't know you. How do you do?
So we talk about. I'm gonna do a super condensed bio.
Do it.
I love Boston because I went to school there. I went to Harvard there, and I had a great time there. I actually did music while I was there. I wanted to do music. I didn't matriculate to do music, but I did music because it was a vibrant musical city, and also there were so many different college campuses, and I could do talent shows every weekend if I wanted to. So I did that, came out of school, took me a minute to catch my break. I caught my break in 2003 in New York, got a management contract as a producer with Puffy, and then in 2004, I started to really get into social media, and social media at that time was like early Facebook and MySpace. And so I built, basically with the help of my buddy Rashid Richmond, we built kind of the first pop star, if you will. Her name was Cassie, and we built it using an SEO powered MySpace campaign. What that means is that every time someone searched the MySpace keyword, Cassie's MySpace music profile was the #2 Google search result. And so that led to a lot of traffic, led to her being #1 unsigned MySpace artist.
So is that hacking? Is that hacking, do you think, or
hacking the music industry?
Yeah. Okay, that's good.
Yeah. I mean, look, call it what you want. I mean, I think it takes a certain level of ingenuity, and there's a window, right? So it takes a certain level of ingenuity to take advantage when there's a paradigm shift. Yep. And you got to use that ingenuity when the paradigm shift is happening to be an early mover. We were super early on MySpace, super early on YouTube. I actually ran into Steve, one of the founders of YouTube, and told him that he actually sent me a t-shirt. That's how many videos and views we were generating at the very beginning. He sent me a thank you t-shirt. And the Cassie story is really interesting because it was the precursor to all of the thinking around Superphone. So she had 650,000 MySpace friends. She was probably the first and only artist in social media history to sell as many albums as she had online friends.
Yep.
So she had a correlation, 650,000 albums, 650,000 MySpace friends. Probably wasn't exact 1-to-1, but at least the numbers correlated.
Yeah.
And when everyone migrated away from MySpace, we lost all the equity in that platform. And that's really where the first seeds of Superphone were planted. I went on to release 2 albums of my own, the second of which was nominated for a Grammy. I went completely rogue. I went independent. And my latest releases have been distributed via text and just direct to consumer. So I think that's really why we connected, man. You know, we were on a panel kind of talking about that. And I think that's really, that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Yeah. Oh no, that's awesome. I spent a lot of time hacking MySpace too. I didn't quite get it to your level, but that's awesome. So, as a question now, what's your earliest memory of music? What's your earliest kind of like when you first remember things? What's your first musical memory? Do you have one that's kind of strong for you, or your first few memories of music?
So many, so many. My mother is a classically trained pianist, so we would fall asleep listening to her play Chopin, Franz Liszt, Mendelssohn, Schubert, Brahms, Beethoven, like I mean, really getting into it. And I think I fell in love with Chopin before I fell in love with any other music, right? Because my mother, obviously it's my mother's hands on those keys. And it didn't matter how difficult our economic situation was, we always had a piano. Like we would go, if we were to find it at Flea Market, whatever it was, we always had a piano in the house. And my parents are Salvation Army officers, and the Salvation Army has a very strong brass band tradition as well. So my first memories of music were also in the Salvation Army, and I wanted to, there's always a hierarchy in any band, so you want to play first chair, and I started on cornet, and eventually I wanted to move to percussion because of pressure, and I had an overbite, so the embouchure of the instrument, the embouchure piece, and my lips were sore and that kind of stuff. So, but anyway, those are my early musical memories in the Salvation Army church, and then at home with the family.
Do you remember the first record you bought, or the first cassette, or whatever format it was on?
Man, you know what? I actually, it's funny. One of my friends is Stuart Goldfarb, that used to run Columbia House, and buying records. My dad had 8-track tapes, and I didn't even know when he bought them, or and then we sometimes I think we would buy cassettes, and a lot of times the cassettes would be like karaoke tracks of praise and worship songs from church. And so you would have like Maranatha music, and so like my first records I think were actually, or the ones that my parents got for me was I think it's called Ansylvania. So these were like anecdotal children's stories with a religious undertone that had they were kind of like musicals on cassette tape. And then when I actually started to listen to my own music, Columbia House was out, and it was like, oh, you could buy, for the price of one CD, you get 7, and they would mail them to you. And I think for me at that time, I think it was like I bought like the antithesis of all that music I'd grown up on, like Dr. Dre, Ice Cube. I was in California, and so I think those were the CDs that I got.
Yeah. Awesome. So a couple questions from the people out there now. Where do you see the music industry moving as an artist with digitization and streaming growing? That's from lore.vigs.
So where do I see the music industry going? I mean, I think the music industry is as vibrant as it ever was. The number of artists that I can discover, the amount of music that's created and released every day is incredible. And so I think to think about streaming and think about growth, and when you look at the actual metrics that Spotify releases, that more and more people are streaming, I think actually we could talk a little bit, Benji. You could touch on Zoe Keating, who you had on the previous live. She actually released her royalty statements. Am I right?
Yep, she did. She did, yeah.
And in an off year, a non-album year, I think she did something like 85, 90 grand or something for that year. And the bulk of it was still based on actual real hard sales of music, not streaming, right? Because you make such pennies on the streaming. And I think for me, at least, speaking directly about my business is really driven by live experiences, which are priceless because the moments are fleeting. And even if you were to watch, one of my favorite concerts that I used to watch was Michael Jackson in Bucharest. And even though I could watch it, I love streaming, I love looking at it, and turn up the music, it was all really well mixed and everything with Michael Jackson. sure that that experience of me watching it, as excited as I got, was only a tiny percentage of the experience of everyone who was actually in that stadium. And so I think really for music, it's about, and this is really just the concept behind everything that I do, it's about actually knowing the people who you can share the music with in person, right? And so, like, I read Richard Branson's autobiography, and one of the stories, I believe, that really stood out to me was the story of the first Virgin record store, and how he described it as a place where like people would just come over, they'd listen to records, sit down, and the experience of listening to an album was not like fleeting, like just like one one song, or you know, you play your favorite song over and over. You play the vinyl and like you talk about it afterwards and what does it mean, etc. And for me, I've been able to translate that experience to my life before I really have a conversation with my audience. I'm not doing big stadiums. I'm doing 800 to 2,000 seaters, sometimes even as small and intimate as 500 seaters. And so that's kind of my, you know, that's the romance that I had reading about that, and I try to bring that into that live. And so really when you think about the economics, someone that will spend $40 to come and see you live, or spend $100, $250 to see you perform live, if you want to focus on straight business and numbers, then you focus on those people, because let's just say you find 1,000 people that give you $200 over the course of a year, that's $250,000, and that's a pretty decent living for a musician.
Definitely. So before we go there, let's talk about this for a second. I teach the Berklee Online course. I've spoken to hundreds, thousands of musicians. You have too. One of the things I love about hanging out with you is, you know, we get to talk to young musicians and tell them how to get their business in order, what to think about.
Right.
And what I am still amazed by is that in 2017, a ton of these artists will still say, all I want to do is get signed to a major label. Now, you've been through that. Can you walk us through, A, what happened to you when you got signed, up till the moment where you realized I should no longer be signed, and then just talk about like what you would say to that young artist who's like, that's my only path?
Yeah, you know, I've had a lot of those conversations, Benji. It's actually, you know what, it's almost a heartbreaking conversation, right? Because anyone that I sit down with, artist or otherwise, and I say, what do you believe is the main barrier between where you are today and where you want to be? And invariably, I always get the same interchangeable number one answer. Either I don't know the right people, or I don't have any money. And when I think about the reasons why artists want to be signed, they want to be signed because, in theory, the label is supposed to be the custodian of your art.
Underline in theory. Underline in theory. Yeah.
And also, they serve as like a very, very expensive loan, very expensive bank, right? Yep. And so, you know, I didn't know any better, and I signed. You know, we signed Cassie to Atlantic through Bad Boy, and when I did my deal, I signed. And really, at first, it was really just about, look, man, I'm tired of being broke, man. I worked so hard. I lived behind a barber shop. I was homeless. Man, $50,000 check, it just sounds incredible. And for me, actually, the checks were even bigger. So those advances, you know, I think I came to New York in 2003, in my first year in the music industry, between record deal, publishing deal, producer fees, etc. I did probably 600, 650 grand that first year. You know, more than my parents had made their whole life in the Salvation Army, 30 some years of working. And so, you know, I could definitely understand the allure of that. So number one, it's about the advances. And then number two, it was about, like we just talked about, the theory that the people at the label had the latitude, had the bandwidth, that they could give the attention that they wanted to every single artist.
Ryan, can you stop for a second? I think we're getting echo. Do you have any headphones you could put in by any chance?
Sure.
Yeah, if you could just roll those in real quick, that'd be great.
Yeah, one second.
Yeah. We're building to a good moment there. Sorry about that. Thanks for letting us know, Antoine Granger and Udi Benjamin Ukendrum. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Oop, we lost Ryan. I will keep talking since we just lost Ryan in the move to headphones. So we'll pause for a second here. This is the one good thing about being live, baby, live. No one doing it. So in the meantime, while we wait for Ryan to come back, I'll just describe the moment that we first met. Ryan and I were on a panel at MIT at, I think it was the Innovation Lab. And Ryan, of course, was in the midst of developing Superphone, and we were on with some of the team from Spotify. And what struck me was I've always been a passionate advocate of the direct-to-consumer model. It's always been a crazy obsession of mine. And what Ryan was describing to me when he showed me Superphone for the first time was one of the most extraordinary things I've ever seen. For me, oh, and he's coming back. For me, it had always been about, email addresses. But when Ryan basically brought Superphone to my attention, it was for the first time it was for SMS, and that was just absolutely game changer. Hey Ryan, I was keeping it going while you were gone there.
Thank you.
No worries.
Is this better?
That's perfect.
Can you guys hear me better? Okay, great.
That's perfect.
Great.
Thanks. So you were just talking about, we'd underlined where the label stood, and then you were about to go into the next bit. So thanks for that. Yeah,
for sure. So really, what happened is that once I got into the system, I realized that as passionate as all of the label executives were, they had a duty to their bottom line to focus on the acts that were less risky, if you will. And so if you were a developing artist on a roster versus Lady Gaga, Nicki Minaj, Lil Wayne, then the amount of time and energy and resources that could get allocated to your project was, posed a pretty incredible risk to a record company when they had sure shots like the artists that I just named.
Yep.
And, I like I said, I released 2 albums. My first one sold 180,000 copies. My second one sold 60,000. And I remember the marketing meeting that I went into where I said, hey guys, listen, why did my Grammy-nominated second album only sell a third of my, garage-based first album, right? Arguably better body of work. I'm more mature musically, etc.
Yeah.
And I said, why wasn't the first line of communication to just email, like you talked about?
Yeah.
Just email everybody. It's 2009, 2010. Why didn't we just email everybody who bought the first project? And they just looked at me and said, well, we don't know who bought the first project. I don't know, what do you mean? We're in the latter half of the first decade of the 2000s.
Yeah.
And like Mark Zuckerberg can keep track of like however many hundreds of millions of people. And, I got a couple 100,000. We don't know who those people are. This is crazy.
Yeah. And the most amazing thing was, and I explain this to the students a lot, where I'll say, like, you got to realize the artist brings the music into A&R. A&R, once it's signed off, goes to distribution. Distribution goes to the store. Store goes to the fan. So that disconnect is absolutely huge. So anyways, so you say to them, why don't you email everybody? And they're like, huh?
Yeah.
How could we do that?
Yeah. And then really that also, struck a chord with me, because I said, well, if I was trusting these people who are the pros,
yep,
to be the custodians of my audience, that basically means that I'm all the way up a creek, because if I was trusting them to do it and so I could just focus on the music, then that means, all of my social followers, and at the time, Twitter, I only joined Twitter in 2009. So luckily for new musicians, you have social platforms where you can start to aggregate your audience, and then it's about extracting that audience to a place where you have ownership of the audience, right?
Yeah.
And for me at that time, maybe there was Topspin, maybe, and DA, who's, a pretty forward-thinking guy, was thinking about Salesforce personally for his band, Chester French. But aside from that, I just, I never really heard the kind of thinking, progressive, innovative thinking about audience management and audience ownership. And so I asked for a release, I got a release, and it took me a couple of years to put it together. But in 2013, started texting all my fans.
Yes. So let's talk about texting your fans. So we've got a couple of questions on that, and a question from Nora Tyrrell, which is, what's the weirdest thing to have happened to you since sharing your phone number publicly?
Okay, so here's what I would say. All right, most big businesses in the world have a public phone number, right? So it's almost like, all right, maybe it's not like, but it's almost like asking Verizon or Delta, what's the weirdest customer service phone call you've gotten, right? And I've had a lot of weird things that people have asked, folks have asked, and I believe it comes from a genuine place. Hey, can you pay my college tuition? Hey, can you pay my mortgage? But I mean, really, it's mostly been incredibly awesome things that have happened. I got my first investor because Tristan Walker sent me a text. When people are upset about, missing a photo opportunity, they can reach me directly. And if I'm around, I'll send my driver back, or, I'll tell them where I'm eating so they can actually meet up and take a photo. But I would say I wanted to bring my girl to a Britney Spears concert in Vegas once. Yeah. And what was interesting was that I was coming from New York. She was coming, I think, from New Orleans. And I purposely made it so that we could connect in Atlanta and we could go to Vegas together. And the beauty of Superphone was just the fact that when people text me for the first time, my phone automatically asks them for their info. So I know where people work, I know what they do, etc. Yep. And my plane was going to take off from Atlanta and leave Danny in Atlanta, and she would have missed the Britney Spears concert. And I was able to literally be able to look at my phone and say, who works at Delta in Atlanta that I could actually ask to hold that plane? And they held that plane. She was the only passenger who was coming from that connection. So that's why they were just going to go. And I said, well, what's going to happen if we go? Is there a later flight? No, this is the last flight. She has to stay the night. I said, look, please hold that plane. And I'll never forget how awesome it was to be able to actually, it's not just about fans or people who spend money, but just like, we're all people. And what I found the most beautiful, I think, takeaway of having a phone number on all the people who support me is that people in general, they want to help, in whatever way they can. So whether that's support, whether that's fixing my iPhone screen, whether that's, helping to hold a plane for me, whatever it is. And that's, those are examples of really awesome stories.
And so we said we weren't going to get political, but and this isn't a political question, but I want to ask this, like, do you think people are good? Because you are one of the few people that has a lens on, tens of thousands of people who seem to be like behind you and wanting to see you do well. So are you hopeful? Are you positive? Do you think that, like, when you see negativity on one side, you can say, like, I'm telling you, it's the other way? And would you say to artists emerging today, look, people are good, they want to help, but you've got to let them?
Yes, I agree with that. I think, I think that's the thesis behind the creation of Pledge, right? Is that people are good. And when you give them a reason, when you show them that you're working hard, when you show them that, the same way that they work hard at their 9-to-5 and day-to-day jobs, you're working hard to create the best expression creatively that you can, I found that people want to support. And so, I think there's countless stories, there's other platforms which really illustrate that kind of support and that idea. And so, for me, I think people are good.
Awesome. So a question here from the Take Note blog, which is this: Ryan, from Barbara, Ryan, when you're producing, what do you do to get the performers to bring out their best?
Man, that's a great question. It varies, Sometimes you're in the studio, like I've been in the studio with like a Mary J or an Alicia, and they're such consummate artists that I mean, I don't even have to tell them. They're always, oh, let me get that take again. Let me, they actually, they push. And actually, you know what? I'll be honest. Most artists that I've worked with, that's the way they approach, their recording process. I really, there's probably, at the very beginning, when I'm working with new artists, they might get fatigued. Because I'm one of those 12 hours in the studio on one song type of guys, and then come back again and meticulously pour over the same record for another 12 or 24 or however many hours. And so I find that sometimes younger artists, they get actually fatigued, or newer artists, they get fatigued. But I find that like most people are, at least the artists that I've worked with, are really perfectionists. And when I say perfectionist, I'm not talking about technical perfection. It's about, hey man, let's keep that one track, let's keep that one take because the feel was perfect, So even if the timing might have been off, or a note might have not exactly followed, or the chord might have been inverted a different way, they keep the feel. And I really feel like, man, I've only had one conversation with Quincy Jones. It was backstage at the VMAs. I had done a bunch of music for Puffy when he hosted the VMAs in Miami. And being backstage with Quincy, I said, hey Quincy, man, I'm a producer too. What do you recommend? And he said two things. One is always shoot for the moon, because even if you miss the moon, you still land among the stars. And number two is, whatever you're doing, make sure it gives you the goosebumps, because if you don't have the goosebumps, how do you expect that it's going to give somebody else the goosebumps? And so really the best take is kind of subjective, right? Maybe they breathe inside of the take somewhere that that you would expect them to breathe somewhere else, or you want something all in one breath, or you want them to push harder, etc. And mostly my experience in studio with artists is that it's collaborative. I might just make a suggestion and say, hey, why don't you try it this way? And that's the beauty of modern recording, is that you really can A/B, different takes, etc.
Have you had much experience in recording on tape and in the sort of the previous way?
Absolutely, man. So I learned on a Tascam, half-inch tape recorder, or maybe a quarter-inch reel, half-inch reel. I don't even remember now. It was like in the mid-90s, man. We were in the basement of Harvard, and that's all they had. And then we moved up to ADAT, and that was like the big thing,
Oh, the ADATs, I remember those. How thin can you make it sound?
Exactly. And then you take it from there to like, oh yeah, I want to put my master on a digital audio tape, and then you have those little digital audio tapes. I still have a bunch of those. So yeah, I've had my share. I never got into like big 2-inch reel recording, where or splicing tape, as I've watched in different documentaries. But man, I've definitely cut my teeth, man.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And so this is a good question that came in from @YouCanDrum. If for some reason you couldn't produce your own songs, who would be your preferable producer?
Oh man.
And the answer can't be Quincy Jones. Okay. It can be if you want it to be. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I do recommend people, watching that Spike Lee documentary on Michael Jackson, because you get a sense of like how a real producer, working with Tommy Mottola. When I made my first record, he said, "Man, this is good and everything, but let's sprinkle some like real heavy hitters. You've done some cool keys and key bass and synth bass, but let's bring in T-Bone Walk to do some rhythm guitar and bass." And so, kudos to Tommy for really introducing me to that, because up to that point, I was producing on my own just out of necessity. I couldn't afford a bass player, or I chose not to afford, the type of equipment or bringing a live band into the studio. So I think honestly, today, man, there are so many really good music producers that are not the marquee, names. Like, so for me in hip hop, yes, Kanye, yes, Swizz, yes, Pharrell, yes, Just Blaze, yes, Metro Boomin, yes, Mike Will, yes, TJ Mustard, yes, Dr. Dre, yes, Timbaland, yes, ill mind, collaborators I've worked with. But for me, on my last record, I did the Black Phoenix Beat Club, and really, young producers like Kawhi and Danny Ives and go back and take a look at those credits, man. Tony Talkbox, people that were, Brian Ramcharan, people that were on my record that I just discovered from online. And so if I was going to do a record that I couldn't produce myself, I would spend a lot of time just scouring SoundCloud and SoundClick and YouTube and finding folks that I felt really had progressive sound. Like that's really I think that's really the wonder in Wonder Girl. Like I brought her to Germany and we just rashed out. She was no more than 15 or 16 years old, and she was hanging with Travis Scott, producing records for Jay-Z like Crown. And so that wasn't like that wasn't like some huge record producer. So for me, I would go to the youth, man. I would go and find the folks that are really cutting edge, really progressive, using Ableton or whatever it is in a way that was even beyond my knowledge and learning and expertise.
That's amazing advice, because I think so often people get like, it's my one shot. I have to go with a known name that's going to get me there. And I think at the same time, every one of those known names had that one shot given to them.
Yes.
That was something special. And for every producer that begins on the bottom rung, my first records, I would work with the tape ops. Anyone who would, and that's how old I am, right? So anyway, so one question. This is from Tim Steve. What is your advice to someone who wants to be good at different things in the music industry, as someone trying to be a music producer and film composer? And I think that kind of scales into the question about how do you manage to be a producer, a performer, and a business person at the same time?
Yeah. I mean, listen, I read somewhere, and I gotta go check my reference, that in the course of a day, your attention span really is limited to like 4-hour blocks. And so that's why I guess, the workday is 8 hours with the lunch break in the middle. Maybe that stems from the same sort of ideology. But I really believe that if you want to be great at more than one thing, the best way to accelerate being great is to actually invest time in a relationship with a mentor, because that mentor is going to help you to navigate beyond and through and around the pitfalls that they've already, run into. And obviously in an ever-changing technological world, they're not going to be able to prepare you for everything, but they will be able to, I think a great mentor, great teacher. I mean, when you look at Tiger Woods, you look at the Williams sisters, and you look at their pathway and trajectory, whether it was their father coaching them, or in Tiger's case, and Serena, and in Venus's case. I mean, you got to find that person. And if you don't have it in your immediate network and your immediate circle, as much time as you're investing in honing your craft, etc., I would say you need to invest an equal amount of time in finding the best one that you can find. And eventually he's going to make you an introduction when you're ready to someone that's, can give you even more opportunity or access to more knowledge. And so that's what I would recommend.
Yeah. And so as far as that mentor-mentee relationship, I think that's really important. I've certainly got people that I go to when it's like, it's that 2 a.m. phone call. I'm freaking out. Someone will walk you off the ledge. Like, where do you find your people like that? Is it just, on the highway of life, or?
Yeah. Well, what's beautiful, man, is that 9 times out of 10, the greatest introductions really come from great references, right? Yep. And so that's why that's kind of like the second story and underlying track of Superphone. Is initially I started this to actually have a phone number on every supporter, and then what I realized is that I basically, having a manager, having a label, I thought that I was supposed to be this insular, super creative, nobody can touch me type of person. And the beauty is that when you open up your phone to the world, the number of people that do want to help, the number of people that you can help as well, really it's staggering to really think about. And so like my mentors, especially in startup, really came from, people actually just reaching out and a lot of times I believe that the fun in life is saying yes.
Yep.
And in order to say yes, someone has to give you an invitation, you know? And so like, just be as open as possible to the invitations. Maybe you meet folks, you know, I probably made a lot more. I would make a lot more money per se doing shows and focusing on all my time on shows. But if I didn't say yes to speaking on that hacking arts panel at MIT, we wouldn't be. Maybe we would have gotten here eventually.
Yep.
But you know, it's about saying yes, man. And you know, I would say that you know, even our relationship. What's cool about it, man, is that you know, in our early conversations, and full disclaimer, Benji's an investor at Superphone.
Yep.
You know, our early conversations, you know, it really was for me. Instead of walking me off the ledge, it was like I was like, Benji, man, you know, do you think I'm ready to jump into like actually building a platform? You know, and he said, hey, man, you got to do it, man. You got to go for the gusto, man. And so I think you'll also. I have a friend. Her name is Carlina, and she's a neuroscientist. She's getting her master's in neuroscience, and she says it takes literally a split second for you to size another person up. And so I think that it's also really important to just have as many split-second encounters with as many diverse people as you can, because you're just innately you're going to size those people up, and the people that you connect with, you never know, you know, the beauty and the value that relationship can bring you. So for me, it's just about being as open as I can be.
I hear you. So this is a great question from Dom Jones, and I think I know the answer to it because I've met you and hung out with you, which is this. Ryan, if you hadn't first been signed to a deal, do you think you'd be as independently successful as you are today? And I'm just going to go ahead and say yes, I think so, because I think then anything would stop you, but you know.
Yes, I think so. I think so. And you know, in many ways, when I'm doing something like this, I always think to myself, what do I know now that I would tell my 19-year-old or 20-year-old self?
Yep.
And you know, the beauty of that question is it's kind of a paradox, right? Because my 19-year-old self wouldn't actually have had access to everything that I have now in terms of like technological innovation, platforms, etc. But given the platforms and the way that music and content and creativity can be distributed today,
yep,
the real value is in relationships. And if you want to think about it, like, you know, I got a buddy, his name is Rennie. On Instagram, he's Rennie. And he's a comedian. And he literally he was putting his short form comedy on YouTube, not on YouTube, on Instagram. And folks were reposting his content, you know, Chris Brown and, you know, Bryson Tiller. And if you go to his Instagram right now, he's actually doing a skit with Kevin Hart, okay? Now, a while back, you know, unless you guys had the same agent or unless you guys, you know, were casting the same film together, you wouldn't even meet each other. But the beauty of social today is that those kinds of connections, you know, when I first sat down with Rennie, it was just like a cold message that I sent to him on Instagram, saying, hey, man, I like what you're doing. Let's just catch up. Let's see if I can be helpful, etc. And he told me, look, you know, these are my heroes. These are my legends. These are the folks that I look up to. Those people are accessible, man. And, you know, in today's world, they are. And so, you know, building on the idea that I think that people are good, and then also building on this concept that that when you can illustrate that you really want it and you're willing to work for it and you want there to be a value exchange, then I believe that, you know, the independent route, I mean, look at Chance. I mean, honestly, just look at Chance. I mean, it's possible. And, you know, folks like him, folks like Nipsey, folks like Amanda Palmer, the blueprint is there. Folks like myself, folks like many of the PledgeMusic artists, the blueprint is there. It comes down to how hard and how smart actually
Yep.
do you want to work to put that business model together. And I
And
think
yeah, and that's a huge amount of it is working hard versus working smart. I mean, I see artists all the time sitting there like saying, I just got to get my tape. I just got to get my music to this person, to this person, to this person, to this person. And at the same time, I'm like, you know, I think it's Tim Ferriss in the 4-Hour Workweek where he has this bet where he says, I want you to pick someone like Eric Schmidt from Google or someone. And if you can find a way to get a message to them and get them to talk to you, I will buy you a round trip ticket anywhere in the world. And he gives this bet all the time. Right. And he says that literally if 100 people see him, 1 per year or something will ever actually take him up on the challenge. And he's like, you know, what does that mean? So as far as that goes, you're 3 things. But there's also artists who are just want to be artists. They want to be performers and musicians. There's artists that want to do this. So like, do you think that artists are naturally entrepreneurial and are naturally kind of, you know, sort of restless and hackers, or do you think it's a certain kind of artist, or, you know, what's your thought there?
Yeah, I think it's a certain kind of artist that wants to, you know, put themselves through the rigors of doing everything.
Yeah.
The beauty of music, though, is I never met anyone, literally 0 people, who don't love music.
Yep.
I've met 0 people. It's you know, someone reach out to me if you don't love music, because I would love to sit down and just talk to you about what happened and what, you know, how that could even be possible.
Okay, so here's a question for you. If you found them, if you found that one person, what would you play them to change their mind?
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
You can think about that while we.
No, I already know. I would literally sit them in a room and lock them in a room with Stevie Wonder's Songs in the Key of Life.
Nice.
That's what I would do. That's how I fell in love with.
That would be hard to resist.
Yeah. But what I would say about artists that just want to be artists, once again, it comes down to the relationship. And when I say everybody loves music, there are people who very clearly, very early on, understood that they weren't going to be the musician. They love music. They tried. They touched the keys. They did this. They did that. They love music. They love being around the culture of music. They love being around the culture of live performance. They love being in the studio, etc. And those are the people that make great managers. Those are the people that make great digital media folks. Those are the people that make great tour managers. And so once again, it's about finding those people. You got to find your unit, find your crew.
Yep. And so another good question here, which is from Hamari Williams. You mentioned about the 4-hour bursts of work. Do you still do that 4-hour sleep pattern?
Yes, absolutely. I'm operating today on like 3 or 4 hours.
That's from Da Vinci, right? Leonardo da Vinci.
Yeah,
so how does it work? Can you describe it to us?
So if people want to know more about it, you can just Google polyphasic sleep or Dymaxion sleep. I basically got accustomed to it when I was in school, and my first year was pre-med, and you know, there were a bunch of people that wanted to try this, you know, so that we could stay up late doing problem sets or whatever it was, and really squeeze more out of our day. And so I've been doing this, man, for, you know, more than a decade, and I don't know if you know, science is split on whether or not it's healthy, but it's worked for me.
Do you feel healthy?
I feel great, man.
So what is it? So you do 4 hours awake and then you sleep for 15 minutes? Is that how it works, or?
Yeah, it's kind of a vibe like that. So my vibe is 3 or 4 hours. Usually sometime between like 3 and 7 a.m. Yeah. And then whenever I get tired, and people actually, my team, my interns, my entourage, my staff, they always laugh at me because they say, well, Ryan can fall asleep, you know, in a 15-minute ride from one meeting to the next, and then be all the way on for the meeting, you know. So that's how I've been accustomed. I take a 15-minute, you know, or 20-minute anytime I actually feel tired. Yeah. But you know, when you're working on something that you're really passionate about, there's definitely been times where, you know, you go 2 or 3 days. Like I remember times at Harvard, I'd be 2 or 3 days in the studio, and my roommate would just be like, Ryan, you know, were you in a cave somewhere? And I would be going because, you know, you're learning. Yeah. And when I first started coding, it was that way as well. You know, you're learning, and you know that your brain has the capacity to do it, you take a break, you order some food, and then you get right back into it, man, because you see the progress happening.
Yeah. So this is a question from Mike King. He's the head of marketing at Berklee, and a dear friend of mine. So it's a longer question, but he's interested in your communication strategy. And I know that kind of Superphone, obviously, in the tech side is the key one that seems to have worked for you. But how do you work on the monetization of your permissioned list? And then is there a ratio of marketing to sales focused messages with fans? So basically, like you can't obviously hard sell all day long. If you're listening, don't hard sell all day long. But like, do you have a ratio in mind? Is it a natural thing that you feel? Or do you program it? What's your thinking?
Yeah, I try to stay as far away from programming as possible.
Yep.
Man. So like, so literally yesterday, I released a single over Facebook Messenger.
Yep.
Okay, so and the way that works is, if y'all are interested in hearing my new single, it's called "I'll Be Waiting." I released it on Facebook Messenger, and the way it worked is you send me a Facebook message.
Yeah.
Superphone will hit you back and ask you for your info. Make sure I got your info on my phone. Then it will hit you back with a confirmation code. You type reply with the confirmation code. I ask for your location, so when I'm touring, it'll drop a pin so I know where everybody is, and then send you the song, and you can listen to it, and you can go through the lyrics and everything. Now that is a sequence that can really only happen on Facebook Messenger, like sharing location, sending an embedded audio file,
yep.
Buttons so that you can read the lyrics as you go along. And so for me, really, it's always about kind of a very, I use social for my Billboard as a marketing channel, and that's the top of the funnel for me. So social is the Billboard. Hey, what's up? I'm going on tour. Send me a text if you're interested. And then my system actually helps me to segment down so that the messages, when they go out, I very, very, very rarely have a message that literally everyone should hear. And that's because a lot of my experiences are geo-fenced, right? So, why would I tell everyone in the entire world that I'm playing New York unless it was like, hey, this is my last concert of all time. You should fly to New York from Japan, Brazil, Mexico, Portugal, and everywhere else to do it. I'm going on tour so I can meet people where they are. Yep. And so for me, it's about inbound.
Yep.
Like I said, I use my social platforms as the Billboard to create this inbound, and I have a sophisticated enough system that it will assign, and this is kind of getting technical, but it assigns user attributes to every single interaction. Yep. So I know where someone came from, I know what link they clicked, I know if they bought before, I know if they prefer merch over streams, over live experiences, I know if they've never bought anything at all, I know if they only want to hear about like a new video or a new song if it's free. And so that for me, honestly, I just had this conversation this morning with a good friend of mine, Paco, and I said, yo, Pac, man, he works in luxury.
Yep.
And when you think about relationship management, for me, I'm interested always in getting the most valuable exchange from my relationship.
Yep.
And you can't. There's literally, the reason why it's tricky for music is because there's so many people that are transacting with you at a very, very small ticket.
Yep.
So if it's a stream, it's like literally a fraction of a penny. If it's buying a song, it's like $1.29. If it's buying an album, it's $10. If it's buying vinyl, it's $24.99. If it's buying a ticket, it's $45. If it's buying a meet and greet at my level, it's $200 or so. And then there's like a crazy VIP experience, maybe for $2,500. That's the biggest ticket item you can get to. And so for me, if I had 100 people that give me $2,500, that's still pretty strong, right? And then if I had 10,000 people give me $100, that's still $1 million. And so for me, it's not really about like getting. I never really want to be at the scale that I can't get all the way down to that personal connection. And I think the I know Kevin Kelly always talks about the 1,000 true
fans.
And for me, Yeah. And I think for me, I can, with Superphone, I can probably get it to about 10,000 that I actually can have, a real personal touch point and connection with. And so that's why it's not about marketing, broadcasting, et cetera. It's about meeting people where they are and knowing when they message me, hey, Ryan, is there a new piece of vinyl? Well, that's when they want to get the vinyl. Hey, Ryan, is there a new tour? Well, that's when they want to go on tour. Ryan, is there any new songs? That's when they're interested in consuming. And so that inbound has actually been really powerful for me.
That's awesome. That actually stems in with another question from Dom Jones here, which is how scalable is Superphone for an artist just starting out? Once their active audience reaches a number in the thousands, or do you think it's before then?
Oh man, I think it's scalable. I mean, for me, I'm at 60,000. And I think in order to make it scalable, it comes down to how well you can segment that audience. So in order to make it scalable, you need to be able to really filter down people who love vinyl in New York. And then gather those people together and do a vinyl signing. And so I really look at this, at least for an artist, I really look at it as, okay, if you're going to go on tour, how many people do you need or would you like to reach out to if you want to sell out an X size venue? So if you want to sell 500 tickets, you probably want to know 1,000 people or so, or 1,000, 1,500 people in order to sell 500 tickets. Now, what I learned is that sometimes you really only need to know 200 people because they all bring a friend or two, and you still sell out a 500 seater. And so when you really start looking at it systematically in that way, and that's the way that I approach, my communication strategy, it's about what are the groups specifically that I'm interested in messaging to, and what's the message that's most appropriate for that group. And so for Dom, I would say, look, you got to figure out, first of all, can you own your own neighborhood? Because if you can own your own neighborhood, you're saving yourself travel costs whenever you want to play, right? And then if you're finding via social, and there's all kinds of great analytics tools, so, whether it's Iconosquare or Minter or Social Rank for your Instagram following, and there's all kinds of tools that you can look to try to segment the audience that you're growing. And when you start finding that you have some traction in different markets, it's about actually owning those relationships in those markets. I mean, you could talk about it too, Benji. I mean,
no, definitely,
how you build your email list so that you can segment down and make sure that the communication is getting to whoever. And so if you only have 1,000 people in every city and you want to reach 50 cities in the United States, that's 50,000 people, but it doesn't mean that it's unmanageable or unscalable.
Gotcha. And this is actually a really good question that came in from LaRue Howard, which is, so does Superphone work along with lead pages and MailChimp and such, or more independently as a mobile access to your fans?
Yeah, so Superphone works with MailChimp. It works with, I mean, it's like any technology platform. You're going to make a great technology platform. It has to be flexible. It has to integrate with other sources of data, because if you want your messaging to be powerful, you want to have the most robust record and access to information on who your messaging is possible. And so, yeah, it works with all kinds of platforms.
Okay, a question from me now. What's harder, business or music business?
Listen, I would say one of the greatest attractions to me of technology is the objective value of technology. Now, there will be competitors, but the objective value of the concept of the product versus music is very, very much based on the subjective value that your audience perceives of your music. And so what I mean by that is like, look, I could do rap music, or I could do R&B music, or I could just release an album of just piano tunes. And even though it's all me, it'll reach 3 different audiences, right? And in order to actually cultivate the relationship, you got to get people to spend time, and you have to be focused, on whatever either the genre or whatever you're doing. And the beauty about technology for me, which is really my only, real vantage point per se that I can talk about when we talk about business, is that being able to message people directly is just objectively valuable.
Yep.
And I just platform scales and it's stable. And there's a certain level of assuredness that is a little bit different than like, okay, is this piece going to connect with all of my existing or new fans?
Yeah, because it's interesting because for those of you listening who don't do startups, you have like kind of definitions of success and definitions of failure, and one of the concepts in startup culture is fail fast. In music, since it's become like that stream can live forever, like you can have a longer term success because the fuel that kind of powers that stream isn't necessarily finite anymore. Whereas in music, in business and startup world in particular, it's you burn cash, you burn money, on, and then you got to go and sit there and talk to investors whose interest is like, we love your artistic vision, we want to make some money, and like so how do you balance those? I mean, is it hard or is it
I love it.
Yeah.
Me personally, I just love it, man.
Yeah.
And different strokes for different folks. People have different temperament, man. I love music. I would do it for free, and I did it for free for many years before I made any money, right?
Yeah.
And I love it. And I think like, the best, people talk about this as a cliche, the best things in life are free.
Yeah.
The fact that I could, at this very moment, just walk over to the piano and enjoy performing just as much as someone could enjoy the performance is just insane to me. And there doesn't even need to be a financial or transactional exchange there. And so I would say that for me, I don't even try to balance it per se. I just kind of take it head on, and I might be a bull in a china pen. But at anything that I do, man, I'm always like, we can do this, man. It's gonna be awesome. We can get it. We can, we're gonna break all the records. We're gonna break all the paradigms. We're gonna break down all the barriers. If there's a wall, we're gonna make a window. We can't make a window. We make a door. We kick it through. That's always my approach to everything. And so I think that's, maybe there are certain folks that just have that makeup.
That's awesome.
So I don't even try to balance.
So I've got one final question for you before we sign off here. And this was asked to me a long time ago, and I'm going to end this series with this question all the time. But like, if you could wave a magic wand and change anything about the music industry today, what would it be?
Oh man.
It's a tough one.
Well, here's what I'll say. I'll say. Okay. I'm advising a platform that's a CRM for art galleries.
Yep.
And I wish that there was a way to, in the same way that an original Warhol is worth however much it's worth. And yes, you can get a lithograph, or you can get, a print or screen print, whatever. You can get replicas of it, and those are all infinitely more inexpensive. I wish that the music industry, if I could wave a wand, could be set up that way, so that the original piece, there was some way, and maybe blockchain is it, but if there was some way to actually assign the type of value that an original painting could have, I think that it would be pretty incredible for artists, man.
Yeah.
That's
awesome. Ryan, we got to wrap it up. Thank you so much for your time and for your insight. This has been absolutely amazing. I want to thank Mike King, Jesse Borofsky, Jonna Jackson, Kaylee Kravitz, Pat Healy, and all of the amazing team at Berklee. Ryan, you're the best. Thank you so much, my brother.
Thank you so much. And if there were any questions that we missed, definitely either shoot me a text. It's on my Twitter. Or send me a Facebook message.
Read it out, man. Read it out. What's your number?
646-887-6962. +1 is the area code. And on Facebook Messenger, I'm Ryan Leslie. Search for Ryan Leslie and look for the picture where I'm going like this. That's me.
Awesome. Thanks a lot,
Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it. Take it easy.